Welcome back to Prof E Plays. I'm Prof E, and in this video, we're going to do the setup for the Dungeon Crawl Classics campaign, which we've already done some character creation for. Here, for the purposes of kind of having the solo engine here, I want to show off the Game Unfolding Machine by JeansenVaars. So that is what I'm going to be using. He has all kinds of nice tables here for oracles and that kind of thing. Now I'll probably be using a mix of this and then also luck, which I mentioned in the previous video. I like games with a luck stat because you can use that effectively as an oracle. One thing that he has in this little thing, I printed this off. You can get it. I believe it's a pay what you want basis on Drive Through RPG. I'll provide a link in the description. And so the game unfolding machine, JeansenVaars has a number of these unfolding machines, and the game unfolding machine is kind of a, like I said, in some ways it's kind of is a kind of overarching, in some senses, magnum opus of sorts, even though it's 31 pages, and that's including the license on the back, that kind of thing. All right. So in any case, I want to walk through the process here for game setup. So he has a number of questions they're going to be posing. I believe it's a total of 8 they're going to have just to set up the game. All right. So well, let's go for it. So first thing, so it's all based on D20 roll. Now I've realized the D20 kind of shoots at a weird angle for my overhead camera, so it'll look like it's a different number than is actually rolled. So just trust me. Okay, this time I rolled a 20. So the 20 on the first roll. So it's what? So your plot starting location is an unexplored continent, planet, lands, or new worlds. So I'm going to say, because we're doing kind of a fantasy setting, it's an unexplored continent or lands, that kind of thing. All right. I don't think it makes sense to go to a new planet because this is not a science fiction setting, and I don't want to deal with going through planes or anything like that. The second question is, what's going on there? I got a number 8. So 8 here. This is actually the face that I see. It says secret organizations, rumors, intelligence, espionage. We're being watched. The question is, what are they scared of? That we are being watched. So, what's happening here? There's some kind of secret organizations. So, we're being watched. Now, this is kind of already starting out kind of odd because remember, with Dungeon Crawl Classics, we start with level 0 characters. So these are basically a bunch of villagers. So I listed these off in the previous, at the very end of the previous video, right? But we're talking about people like, with, I think, there's 2 woodcutters in this. There's a couple farmers, that kind of thing, vagrants and the like. So So we kind of in the background now when you thinking I mean to be thinking about why is it that this set of 13 villagers is now on an unexplored continent and why is somebody else watching them? And so what is going on with that? Third would be time to make your main characters, which would be what we do at this point. And then if it's ready, now scene 0 begins. Right. Okay, so actually, it's not going to be 8 steps. There, 2 of them are just things we've already done, or just kind of introducing what's coming up next. Okay, so number 5 then is eventually you're going to get a plot hook call. So what is it that brings our characters into the action? Here I got number 8 again. A desperate request from someone who really needs it. So I'm going to make the note here from someone who needs our help. And it also gives you some questions or thoughts. So, so you might also think about bringing a minor faction who's deeply affected. Oh, that's interesting. Um, oh, or that's something. Yeah, yes. I wasn't sure whether this was one of those things where you should roll twice or whether you should just roll once. It looks like rolling once is what is intended here. So bringing a minor faction. So I'm just gonna make a note of that. Just a minor faction question mark. I mean, these are all things that I may think about off screen. I just want to show how to uh, set things up with this. So the sixth question is, what should we do and what's the big picture? Right. So there are 2 questions here. One is a mission and one is a catch. So the mission, I have the number 7 here. Okay, so 7 says the mission, we have to look for something in a location. So we have to look for something. And then the catch, this one we very clearly do need to roll again. It's number 6. Number 6 is there are traps. So there are traps. It's quite dangerous, we were told. All right. Well, next then, where do we start? What is the first task? Be the next thing. It's the first task, number 13 here. That is, we need to talk to a prisoner or an equivalent uncooperative character. And then what kind of opposition do we deal with? Oh, turn the page too fast. 12. You have a relationship with one of them. All right. It's so at this point we have a number of elements that we can kind of weave together. Right. So our adventure is starting on an unexplored continent. Right. There are secret organizations involved. Specifically, we are being watched. Uh, we are here because of a desperate request from someone, probably tied to some kind of minor faction. We have to look for something here, but there are traps involved. So, which is that's good for Dungeon Crawl Classics. That suggests that we will be going into a dungeon on this unexplored continent, or a cave, or something dungeon-like. Okay. Then we have to talk to a prisoner, right, or an uncooperative character, and we have a relationship with one of them. So, what I'm thinking about now, just to go beyond kind of the basic roles, would be what kind of, I'm actually just saying, let's flip through a few more of these because there are some other nice tables here. Just want to see if anything here might possibly be helpful. Okay, so because he also has some information about the kind of locations, that kind of thing. Hmm. Oh, I like this. So with defining a location, there's the option here to get more detailed, right? So it's an unexplored continent. So I could say there's a wilderness column that I could roll on, and that could tell me, are we talking about rocks and cliffs? Are we talking about an island? Are we talking about valleys? Kind of where exactly we are? So that's something that may be useful. I don't know that I'm going to use it right now, but that is something that is potentially useful as I'm just kind of thinking about things at the moment. Right. Okay, so I think that's where I'm going to start. Just think of this unexplored continent. The secret organizations watching us. Okay. Hmm. All right. So the thing that stands out to me, right, this whole opposition, you have a relationship with one of them. Now we're talking about a group of 13 disparate people. Among them, they're mostly human, but we do have an elf and a halfling there. A couple farmers, a couple woodcutters, so common folk that are going out for this reason. So questions we need to answer is one, who would give them who would give these villagers, right, a desperate call to go to an unexplored continent? That's an interesting question. Another interesting question is who in the opposition would they all have a relationship with? Right, so this suggests to me the opposition is probably somebody, right, that is from their village or something like that. That's what I'm imagining is that what binds these 13 people together is they're all from the same village. I think that makes sense, right? So we'll start with that, right? So we're all from the same village. The village of, hmm, I'm terrible with names. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look up, use my handy dandy computer here, just to search for random village names. Here we go, random village names. Uh, oh, Rose Lake. That's a nice name. Yeah, so, all right, so I think Rose Lake. It's often the same village of Rose Lake. Gives you a nice image of what's going on here. We have presumably rose bushes around around a lake. This makes sense. Right. Right, so this is where they're all from. Right. So then who is it that would come to town and want them to leave and go to some unexplored continent? Now, it's a desperate request from somebody. Okay. So I'm thinking like this all should tie together to who the opposition was. The opposition is a villager, I think, that already left. Right. That makes sense, right? And left and is part of some faction, perhaps some secret organization, right? So there's another villager that is left. Let's just say he's, I don't know, Leonard. After all, if we have alliteration for names, left Leonard, sure. Okay, so Leonard is the one that left, right? And joined some faction, some secret organization. And I'm going to say the secret organization is seeking out some kind of artifact, right? So a magical artifact. And I'm just going to go very stereotypical here, that it is going to summon some kind of demon or something like that. So, okay, so that's what's going on there. So that'd be our opposition is this cult, right? One of whom we know, right? And so they are watching us. One, um, which that's kind of a good thing to know in the background, right? And they're seeking out this magical artifact. So my thought is then is that this unexplored continent, it's not completely unexplored, in that there used to be some kind of ancient civilization here, but that civilization fell or something, right? So there will be ruins around, right, is kind of my thought, right? So then our villagers were approached. Now, one of my problems is that I have recently uh, picked up again reading The Wheel of Time, so I'm kind of imagining, right, like Moraine coming in and like picking up the boys from Emmons Field, that kind of thing. So that's what I'm imagining is kind of this the same kind of situation is somebody from another faction, right? Um, and perhaps a cleric or something like that, right? So the villagers were summoned, or rather were recruited, right, by a cleric who was trying to, I guess, offset or whatever, is trying to counteract this cult, and so wants to make sure, right, that the artifact is found by him first. There we go. So that this creates some level of urgency. It would explain, right, one, why we have a relationship with some of the opposition, who the opposition is, why they're interested in this, why they would be watching us. I was talking to a prisoner or an uncooperative character otherwise. I feel like that is something that may not actually be the first thing that happens. Um, I feel like that's something that may happen a little bit later, but fairly early on, right? So I'm just going to keep that. I'm going to put a little star by that in my notes. So you're talking to a prisoner or an uncooperative character. There. Right, so we're trying to find this artifact. It is presumably in some kind of dungeon or something like that, right, on this unexplored continent. Right. So I think that that makes sense that that's what we're going to be doing is entering this dungeon. So I think that is where we're going to pick up in our first actual play session. Right, so I think we have our setup here. Now I am going to do some work off camera, and just to let you know exactly what I'm going to be doing, right? In that I want to run this dungeon using some of the principles from the game unfolding machine. One of the things the game unfolding machine provides for us is a suggestion for how to conclude threads, right? Because one thing that JeansenVaars points out is that it's very easy as a soloist to just kind of keep piling layers and layers and layers on top of a storyline so that things never actually come to an end. Right? And it's also true that some of the tools that we use actually lead us this direction. So that is something that we need to be careful about. That is something I have found, for example, when I've used Mythic in the past, it seems like it's much like sometimes you end up in a situation where you just keep adding more and more and more plot lines and have a very difficult time resolving plot lines and removing them from their list, right? So that is something that I have found. But JeansenVaars has a solution here, right? And the idea is fairly simple. That is, you decide on the length of your thread, right? So this, by choosing what they call a plot score threshold. So it's going to be 20, 30, or 40, right? So 20 would be for a small job, 30 would be for an average length, 40 would be for something long or complex, right? And then whenever you do something that helps to progress the plot, right, then you have to assess, right, how much did what you just did. At the end of a scene, you say, how much did this scene actually push us forward in this plot? If it didn't add much, then you roll a d4. If it made some progress, you roll 2d4. If it was quite important, you roll 2d6 and was absolutely critical, then you roll 3d6. And then you take that, and that increases your plot score. And then once you cross the plot score threshold, then you start pushing toward an end or at least a significant milestone, depending on the type of story you're telling. This is something that I could easily see adapted to where we're in a dungeon, right? So we have this dungeon because this is we're level zero. We're not even first level. We're level zero characters. This is the funnel we're using to try to narrow down my set of 13 down to a small set of playable characters, right? So what I can imagine here is we're going to have something like it's a 20-point dungeon. And then after each room, we're going to go ahead and roll and then add to the score, right? So we don't know when we're going to be done, but we know when we're entering the last room because we will have hit that threshold, right? So I like that. I like that idea a lot. Right, so some of what I'm going to be doing off screen, since I said that I would mention it, I'm going to take this Dungeon Crawl Classics book here that I have, and I'm going to create some monsters with it. Right, so I'm going to do a combination of a few things. So one thing that I want to do, I think, is it has, and calling it a monster manual is definitely a bit much. It has a few pages of just pre-made monsters in here, right? So things like here's the Cyclops, that kind of thing. Then it also has rules for how to create your own variations on monsters, right? Which I think would be kind of a nice thing to do as well. So I think that might create some combination of custom monsters as well as pulling reasonable monsters out of here to have a random number, a random table that I can pull from. And so then whenever we enter a room, right, I can roll up to figure out what's in that room in terms of traps, monsters, and the like, and do things that way. So that's kind of where my mind is at the moment. Um, yeah, so I'm going to do a lot of that creation of those random tables off screen. But just to give you an idea of how I'm going to do that, I don't think this will be even less interesting to watch than what I just did. And that I'm going to try to imagine more what this unexplored continent is like, and what is it like geographically, and then I'll be flipping through this, looking for what types of monsters I think would be most likely to appear there. And then just randomly, right, rolling up a few as well, right? So some of those custom monsters is kind of rolling on some random tables that are included in the back of the book here. right, to create those monsters. I think that's about that. I will say before I kind of close out here for this particular video, one thing that is suggested in this, maybe not explicitly but implicitly when you read some of the like adventures and the like, right, one thing that it seems like this seems to follow some of the, I think a lot of the OSR types, right? So people that are part of this old school revival, um, the idea of having monsters that you can't just beat in combat. That is something that I personally find to be very difficult to solo, because implicit in this is typically a level of problem solving that you have to do. The problem is that normally, say, for example, like this book has in here a specific army that it's obvious that your characters cannot possibly beat because it's like 70 soldiers or something like that, right? But there are a couple puzzles previously in that dungeon that provide possible ways of dealing with these soldiers that is not direct combat. And if you do either of these, then it works, and you don't have to actually deal with the combat or have to deal with just like one boss or something like that, right? But the point is that it is absolutely pointless for you to enter into just straight up combat. This is something that I find is extremely difficult to do as a soloist because it's relying on you doing some problem solving in something that was already designed, right? So this is something that either you have to do like I did with Solitary GM, right? So where you as the GM set up the puzzle and then you simulate what your players are doing and try to figure out, do any of the players figure out the solution to the puzzle, yeah, or like when do they, so you know what they've lost before that happens, right? So that is how I can see that working. Alternatively, I have a very difficult metagame that I have to play in that I have to, one, know how to solve this thing, but two, try to figure out how to solve this thing, right? So that's the point where the GM PC, the fact that it's all happening in the same brain, right, is something that I find very difficult to deal with. Right, so that's where I don't like that kind of thing. Instead, I'm going to deal with monsters by either avoiding them, just run away, the runaway tactic, or combat. Right, so it's just going to be those two things, right? So I'm not going to create monsters that you just can't possibly beat unless you've done this one thing that has happened back there in the dungeon, because it doesn't really make sense as a soloist trying to do that for me. Maybe other people can handle this better. I cannot, right? So that's just something so you're aware, right? All right. So I think that is that. That is also why, by the way, I don't think that I'm going to try running like one of these modules straight up or anything like that. Now, there are solo modules that I've found that are based on Dungeon Crawl Classics. I forget the name of it. I'll have to look it up. But there is actually a module out there that you can get through DriveThru RPG that is specifically a solo module designed around Dungeon Crawl Classics. And it's of the choose your own adventure style, which I think that actually looks kind of cool to do. But I think I'm gonna do this differently because I really do actually want to try the game of folding machine. I've not really played with it before. All right, so I think I'm going to call it there. So this is Prof E signing off.